In the last few decades, the war on terror is an often repeated phrase, especially after the September 11 terror attack on the World Trade Center in New York in 2001. The US had declared its war on terror, and multiple conflicts and wars have been carried out in its name over the years. America's main targets over the years have been Islamic terrorists, especially Al-Qaeda, the Taliban in Afghanistan, and even Saddam Hussein regime in Iraq. According to some studies, America's various wars on terror have displaced over 38 million people and caused over 4.5 million deaths directly and indirectly in countries such as Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, Pakistan, Somalia, Syria, Yemen, and Philippines. It is also estimated that this has cost the US Treasury US $8 trillion. The US bombarded these countries under the so-called war on terror, in some cases even going to the extent of terming it a war to destroy what it believed were weapons of mass destruction. One of the prime reasons the US invaded Iraq was to destroy the said WMD. Majority of Americans in the months following the 9/11 attack believed that Iraq either possessed WMD or were about to get them. Except years later, the investigations revealed that there was no factual basis for these assertions. A March 2023 report by Pew Research Center said that the support for US military action in Iraq was built, at least in part, on the foundation of falsehoods. And while we are on the topic of war in the Middle East, let us also talk about the Israel versus Hamas war. On 7th of October 2023, Palestine-based Islamic extremist group Hamas launched a massive coordinated attack on Israel, marking one of the deadliest days in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Thousands of rockets were fired from Gaza into southern and central Israel, with armed militants infiltrating the Israeli towns, causing widespread devastation and hundreds of civilian casualties. To this brutal attack, the Israel Defense Forces quickly responded with airstrikes targeting Hamas positions in Gaza, aiming to cripple their military infrastructure right from the root, and was successful in doing so. As the conflict escalated, Israel expanded its military operations, targeting the Rafah border crossing between Gaza and Egypt to cut off Hamas supply routes. The airstrikes around Rafah caused extensive damage and led to a significant number of casualties. There was a lot of hue and cry around the world regarding the gunning down of terror points in Rafah. However, the anti-Israeli pro-Palestinian lobby failed to recognize the real reasons or security concerns for which they had to be firing in the Rafah area. The strategic intent actually was to disrupt the flow of arms and militants entering Gaza, which was under Hamas control. The lobby also failed to realize the distress that was brought in by the Hamas-backed Palestine on Israel through ages and also in recent times. Simultaneously, Hezbollah, the Lebanon-based Shia Islamist group aligned with Iran, launched attacks on northern Israel, firing rockets and engaging in cross-border skirmishes. The IDF retaliated swiftly by striking Hezbollah positions in southern Lebanon. In a calculated move, Israel's military intelligence focused on Hezbollah's leadership, leading to the death of a senior Hezbollah commander. This targeted assassination, aimed at destabilizing Hezbollah's command structure, prompted further retaliation from the group, which, along with Houthi militants from Yemen, began launching rockets and missiles towards Israel, creating a massive and multi-front conflict. In the midst of this chaos, Israeli intelligence forces orchestrated an operation that neutralized Hezbollah's second-in-command through a carefully planned ambush, significantly undermining the group's leadership. The strike further intensified the conflict as Iran, Hezbollah's key backer, intervened directly. Iran launched a series of missile attacks on strategic locations within Israel, including military installations to support Hamas and Hezbollah, signaling a broader regional involvement. Faced with attacks from Gaza, Lebanon, Yemen, and direct Iranian missile strikes, Israel intensified its defense efforts, relying heavily on its missile defense systems like the Iron Dome. At the same time, Israel launched counterattacks deep into Iranian territory, targeting military and intelligence infrastructure and striking Iranian proxies across the region. This escalation pushed the conflict into a broader regional war, with Israel now engaged on multiple fronts, facing adversaries from Gaza, Lebanon, Yemen, and Iran. The US has been a close ally and like-minded partner in counter-terrorism efforts of Israel. Even during the recent Iranian attack on Israel, the White House has given strong orders from Washington to retaliate freely. And while America's approach to war on terror has been global in nature, Israel's counter-terrorism efforts have been far more localized and focusing on specific threats arising from hostile neighbors, especially Palestinian extremist groups and Hezbollah in Lebanon. Israel also focuses on threats from Iran and its proxies in the region, particularly in Syria. If we talk about the military tactics and doctrines, the US tactics have been shaped by its role as a global superpower. It has relied heavily on large-scale military operations, the use of drones for targeted killings, and special forces for counter-terrorism raids, such as the raid that killed Osama bin Laden. The US has also invested in long-term nation-building efforts, particularly in Iraq and Afghanistan, which has been more controversial and less successful. Israel's counterterrorism strategy, on the other hand, is more focused on immediate, preemptive action. It uses rapid, precision-targeted operations such as airstrikes on militant leaders or ground incursions like those into Gaza. Israel also employs a policy of targeted assassinations and has an extensive intelligence network such as Mossad that conducts covert operations to disrupt terrorist activities. Similarly, when it comes to technology, the US has relied heavily on drone warfare, satellite surveillance, and global intelligence sharing to counter terrorist threats worldwide. Its technological edge also extends to cyber warfare and mass surveillance programs such as PRISM. On the other hand, Israel has developed and deployed high-tech solutions such as the Iron Dome missile defense system to protect its population from rocket attacks and advanced surveillance and cyber tools for monitoring and disrupting terrorist networks. This could be because of the context with which both the countries approach wars. US counterterrorism efforts are embedded in broader geopolitical strategy, especially after the 9/11 attacks. The then Bush doctrine focused on preemptive strikes in the Middle East, which it claimed was doing to establish democracy, or at least its own idea of democracy. To legitimize these attacks, it took its own alliances, such as NATO, into confidence. Israel's counterterrorism strategy comes out of its need to protect its motherland and its citizens while being surrounded by hostile neighbors. It has comparatively fewer allies, and the actions taken by Israel are often unilateral. Israeli efforts are deeply influenced by domestic political considerations and the need to maintain military superiority in the region, which is why the US and Israel are often judged through different lenses when it comes to legal and ethical considerations on their respective wars on terror. For example, while the US faced significant domestic and international scrutiny over the practices like detention of suspects at the Guantanamo Bay, drone strikes which led to civilian casualty, and allegations of torture such as the Abu Ghraib scandal, it often gets to get away with it by suggesting how it is fighting terror as a whole and does not have any particular enemy. Israel, on the other hand, has a very vocal hostile neighbor, Palestine, and a lot of people across the world are divided. While US did not quite have to fight for its territorial integrity, Israel has to fight every day to make sure Israel, the place which the Jews world over can call home, is not wiped off the face of the map as its enemies want. For Israel, it is literally a war for its own survival. But owing to their aggression in their bid to protect themselves and not quite worrying about the geopolitical backlash that may come its way, Israel simply does not seem to be caring too much about morality when it comes to protecting her own.